Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Marilyn Shannon, and this is the Breaking Free Show. And as always, I am honored and humbled that you are spending time with us today. I know it's a busy time, but it's good sometimes just to have a little break from what you do normally. So thanks so much for being here. We're excited to bring our guest to you. It's going to be a fun show. She and I have been just talking behind the scenes. So I'm excited to introduce her to you. But before we do, I just want to say hi to Amnon. How you doing?
Hello, Marilyn. I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Happy holiday, Amnon.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Kwanzaa.
Kwanzaa, absolutely. So it's a crazy time, and but can't forget who we are in the midst of the crazy.
Yep.
So just let me remind you all, please feel free anytime you want to connect with us in our chat. It's live. You can comment, ask a question, make a statement, whatever you like. Just put your name underneath the video and just log in from there. You can always call us into the studio, 919-518-9773, and you can talk directly to us. And then also you can join us in Skype, and that would be with voice, not a video, so don't worry about it. Just join us. We'd love to have you. It's an open invitation. Come in at computers, and that's plural, then the number 2K voice. And you will come in on voice, and you can, again, comment, ask questions, and enjoy the show from there. But we'd love to have you because, you know, it's always really cool when somebody calls in. It gets really exciting. So please feel free to do that. So, you know, our show is all about freedom. It's about breaking free. It's about learning a new idea, a technique, a strategy. It's about understanding somebody else's story so that your story gets even juicier and humbler and whatever it is. It's about us learning together and being educated so that the more we are educated, the freer we are to make the choices that we want to make. And you know, history has a lot to teach us. And so today we're excited because we've got a really juicy book in store to talk about. So let me introduce you to our guest, Natasha Boyd. Welcome, Natasha.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marilyn, for having me on.
Thank you for being here. So tell everybody a little bit about Natasha.
Well, so I'm an author, mother, friend, not necessarily in that order, but so I started writing. I've always been writing, and I've been living in the South. I came to America in 98, met my husband January 99. We got married 2001, and I just have never left. But I found myself moving to South Carolina when my children were very young. And I had to stop working because we were moving for my husband's job. And so I suddenly had all this time on my hands. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do that thing that I always said I was going to do. I'm going to write. So here we are, 8 years later. And it worked. Woohoo! So I've written 11 books. I've published 9 of them. And I write romance, and I also write historical fiction. I've written 1 historical fiction so far. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey. I've learned a lot, made mistakes, still loving the choices I'm making and working out where we go from here, where I go from here.
So I want to talk about your books, but first of all, you said you love the choices you're making. What do you mean by that?
Well, I had a choice early on. The first one I can think of that sort of falls into that is the first choice I made very early on was whether to try and get my first book traditionally published or whether to throw it up in the court of public opinion and self-publish it. I knew that regardless of which choice I made, that I would have to have a professional product. I had a professional editor, I had a professional cover designer. Luckily, I knew those people, so I didn't have to, invest too much. to get going, but I definitely decided to take a sort of personal ownership stake in my future. And I self-published that book. That book did very, very well and ended up earning me an agent. An agent contacted me asking me if I was represented. And so I sort of just made my own career that way. So I was very happy with that choice. I've made choices along the way that have sometimes taken me off course, but mostly I am enjoying the choices I'm making to further my own control over the rest of my life. So there you go.
So what book was that you were picked up by an agent? Which book was
that was my first book, and that was a romance. Well, romance genre definition means your book has to have a happily ever after at the end, and this had a cliffhanger, so I definitely broke some rules. Oops. But it was called Eversea, and it's so tropey. Cinderella story, Hollywood superstar comes to small town, falls in love with the local girl. I mean, you can't get more tropey than that. But it was so fun to write, and I loved the characters, and it really did just resonate with people in such a major way. I'd never sort of experienced anything like it. It sort of had a theme, the town. People loved the town. They wanted to know if it was real. It kind of just took on a life of its own. So it was a wonderful experience, and it did earn me an agent. And then I was able to sort of branch out and feel the confidence to write the historical fiction that I did. I don't think that I ever would have made the attempt if I didn't believe in myself first.
So it was good to have a winner first. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that I had a career first, that I felt like, okay, I'll take this chance. And if it doesn't work, it's okay. It's okay. It was a passion project. The book we're talking about obviously is the Indigo Girl. And it was a passion project, and it was a risk. But it was okay to take that risk. It felt like it was okay to take that risk because of what I'd done before.
So I have a lot of questions.
Okay.
But let's go to the Indigo Girl first, because that was written how long ago?
That was published in October of 2017.
Okay. So, and it was interesting because I was telling Natasha this, that I'm part of a book group on Facebook, a really nice book group. So if you want to know about it, everyone, please write me at marilyn@marilynshannon.com, and I'll tell you about it. It's not my group. Somebody invited me to it, and they list all kinds of wonderful, wonderful books. And I just, I pop around between, I listen to books. I pop around between Audible and Libby because, go back and forth. Anyway, they mentioned Natasha this week, and we had already written to Natasha and already had the show scheduled. So I was so excited. I'm like, is that my Natasha? Or is there another Natasha Boyd who wrote this book? I had to go back and look, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's like the Natasha. So I was like, oh, she's famous.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far.
Well, it's hard for you to say it, but for me, yeah, if I'd reach into the computer and get your autograph. So tell everybody about the Indigo Girl, because it's a fascinating story, and I'm curious all about it.
Okay. Well, so the Indigo Girl is actually based on the true person, Eliza Lucas. And Eliza Lucas, so I told you I'd moved to South Carolina. My husband's actually from Charleston, South Carolina. And when you go to Charleston, South Carolina, you hear the name Pinckney a lot. And I came across Eliza Lucas Pinckney. I was like, oh, okay, just whatever. So then one day I was at an indigo exhibit, and I love the color blue. I'm wearing blue right now, if anybody's actually watching on the thing and not just listening. So I love the color blue, and I became fascinated. I wanted to go to this exhibit, and while I was there, somebody was talking about this girl, and she was a girl. She was 16 years old. And they mentioned her name, and I was like, oh, Eliza Lucas. Like, I think I know that name. And I'd been visiting Charleston all this time, and I never knew her story. I mean, at this point, my husband and I had been married for 15 at that point when I first heard the story. And I had, all that time I'd been visiting and I hadn't heard her story. And it was this incredible woman's story of this young girl who defied expectations. Her father left her in charge of managing 3 plantations. And she didn't hire an overseer. Some of the other plantations had one, but the one where she was did not. And she, needing a way to make money because the family finances were in a little bit dire straits, and the father was pursuing his military ambitions, and you had to buy your commissions in the army back then. And so she turned to indigo dye, which she was told, you cannot grow indigo dye here. It doesn't work. It doesn't grow. It's too expensive to make. But she was convinced, and she, spoiler alert, was successful. And it ended up becoming one of the largest exports out of the colonies. Within 4 short years, she was 21. And it really laid the foundational wealth of the area. And you can tell when you read the book, and based on my research, I could tell that the choking and the sort of the straining against the bit of what it was like to be under British rule at that time, you could already tell that it was going to end up in a revolution against the British all the way back then. And so it was
you're British, right?
Yes, I grew up.
So isn't that
I am partly, but it's fine. Yeah, I grew up in England.
So it's kind of that there's that connection as well, huh?
Yeah, I definitely identified with Eliza a lot. Like I could definitely hear her voice. I mean, I was so lucky that it was incredible actually. She wrote letters. She wrote so many letters, and she made a copy of everything she wrote. So we have such a treasure trove of first-person accounts of what it was like for her own words. And so it was really, I wouldn't say it was easy to get into her head, but it was just a bone. I wrote the book in first person because I really felt like I really understood this person, and I could hear her voice in my head. And she was just funny and progressive and irreverent about things. I mean, at one point she sends her mother is trying to marry her off. And she's got no interest because she wants to, she wants to be a business person. She doesn't want to be a wife. And she is writing to her father, and clearly you can tell that the parents have tried to set her up with somebody. And she writes to her dad, if you put the riches of Peru and Chile together, you still could not purchase sufficient esteem for me to make him my husband. And you just go, oh my gosh, she literally wrote that to her dad, like going, yeah, no, I don't care who you parade in front of me. He could be the richest guy ever. I'm not interested. I'm busy. I've got things to do. And it was just so different from what we imagined with girls at the time. Her personality was so outlandish, not outlandish in a negative way, but she was just so ambitious. And that was okay. I don't think her mother really approved of her ambition, but she owned it. And
what year was that, Natasha?
This is 1739 to 1744 is where I based the book. So age 16 to almost 21.
And what were they doing with indigo prior to that?
Nothing. I mean, the French grew indigo and made indigo, and the British paid the French a fortune for indigo. And it was used for flags and military uniforms and this, that, and the other. The year that she was finally successful with indigo, of producing the dye, was the same year that England and France declared war against each other. So the English could no longer buy it from the French. And it was so fortuitous that she was successful. She actually passed the seeds around to various other planters in the area, and it just became one of the largest crops. Prior to that, it had been rice. People always think it's cotton in the South, but that didn't come till way later. But let me say, I will say this, I'm talking as if I'm this like really learned historian. I know about Eliza just because she was a passion project for me. I was so incensed that I had never heard of her name in all that time that I'd been visiting Charleston. There's so much history there. They love their history. And no offense to the men of Charleston, but all the Charleston history is about the men, written by the men, for the men. And I was incensed on her behalf that people talked about her sons and how they had done this, that, and the other, but they never talked about her. And she had made such an important contribution. And she was so young too. And so I just felt so convinced that somebody needed to tell her story. I wasn't sure it was going to be me. Reason being is because I'm not a historian, and I loathed history in school. Loathed it. I actually that cannot be overstated.
Well, okay. So everybody, you hear that? I mean, you never know.
You just never know.
Never know. You got to keep your ears open. You got to keep your mind open. You got to keep your heart open. You got to keep your creativity open. You got to keep your tantalizing self open.
Yes, just stay open.
You never know, right?
It's so true. And we do, as humans, especially, we go through stages, I think, of going, okay, I'm going to be open to new ideas. And we tend to let ourselves run away with the idea and talk ourselves out of it before we take our first step. You get excited about something, and then you mentally go down the rabbit hole of what is this going to look like? And your immediate, your brain protects you, your mind protects you, and throws all the roadblocks that you could possibly face right up in front of you to imagine and visualize, and then keep you safe and turn you away from that course of taking that risky step. And yeah, it so happens to us all the time. It's even happened to me since I've written that book. Before I wrote that book, it's really, I look at that book and go, I cannot believe that I actually managed to pull that off. And I went down that road, and I didn't let anything stop me.
So yeah, that protection is the ego, and it doesn't know the difference between I shouldn't say it doesn't know. There is the good protection, and then there's the not good protection, and you got to kind of listen between the lines. So I guess the next question I have for you is, when this popped up and you became aware of it, did you know from that moment you were going to write a book, or did you just get curious?
I think part of me knew that I was going to do something with it, but I did not let myself think about what the book that it is today. I did not let myself think about that. If I had, I would have shied away from it as being too much for me. The moment that I knew, I think my subconscious had been working in the background. I did lots of research. I read about her. It's interesting when you focus on something, or when you come across something that intrigues you, your subconscious will start noticing things that you never noticed before, and so the information would keep popping up here and there. I'll be like, oh God, I'm not going to be able to put this idea to sleep because this stuff keeps popping up for me. But the day, I'll never forget it. It was 2014. I was at a publishing conference in Charleston. Actually, it was being held at the Francis Marion Hotel, and it was late. And we had sort of agent meetings and stuff like that. And I'd met with my agent, who is my current agent. So I actually have a different agent than the one I started with. But it was very late at night, and we'd all had a very long day, and we were sitting downstairs. And she said to me, and it was sort of out of the blue question. She said, "What book is in your heart that you're too afraid to write?" And I just got full body chills. It was such a question for me. I just didn't expect it. We were talking about, all manner of just shallow things after the end of a long day. And my mouth started talking and telling her, and my brain was going, shut up. She's going to make you write it. Shut up. And I got to the end of it, and she was just like, you have to write that. And I was like, yeah, I know. And when I said I know, I just knew that I'd known. I just hadn't let myself know. So it was interesting. And it was interesting that it happened in Charleston, which is where she was from. And there's so many times during the course of the process of writing the book, and in the course of publishing, and being invited to speak in Charleston, like at the Charleston Historic Foundation, and people who message me who've grown up in Charleston, had never heard about her, and are just so amazed that they have some woman's history, and I just realized that it feels like Eliza dragged me through this project. kicking and screaming almost. Like when the box of books arrived, like the first printing from my publisher, and I've told the story before, I opened the box and I had that we did it feeling. Not like, oh, I did it. It was a we did it. It was just, I felt like Eliza had been part of that, you know.
So with your other books, and we're probably not done with the Indigo Girl yet, but with your other books, do you have that same relationship with a character that you create?
Eliza was definitely unique, but I will say that, yes, I really do feel like I have to connect to the characters. And I've definitely stopped writing something that I thought that I was fired up about writing when I can't connect to the person I've only ever written in first person. I've never written in third person. And for those of you listening, if you don't know the difference, it's sort of, I woke up this morning and I made breakfast, as opposed to she woke up this morning and she made breakfast. But so I'm very much in the character that I'm writing, even though sometimes when I write romances, I actually switch between the male and female character. I definitely connect with the person that they are, and I get really exercised if they do something I wasn't expecting, which happens a lot. And then I'm like, oh, well, maybe they weren't the person I thought they were, and sort of have a little character conversation. Or if they do something out of character, it's very obvious. And so you go back and you go, okay, well, that wasn't the character, that was me. I wanted the character to do this thing, but now that I know who the character is, they would never do this thing. So yeah, I would say the connection is very strong. And it doesn't come when you open the first page and you start writing your story. It comes over the course of writing your story. And then which is how it should happen. You get to know them. And then, that's why a first draft should never be considered your final product, because you'd go back and see what you wrote in the beginning and change it, because now you know who the people are.
Right. So it took you how long to do the Indigo Girl?
Well, from that moment when I said, I know I need to do this, which was February actually of 2014, I did so much research in 2014. I did a lot of the pre-writing. There were scenes that came to me that I just knew. And if anyone's read the book who's listening, there's a lot of stuff with Ben, who wasn't a real character, but he was based on an idea of something that I'd read in some of the research papers. And he sort of took on a life of his own. But there were some scenes that were so clear to me that I just wrote those first, even though that's not normally how I work at all. I'm very linear, beginning to end. But then 2015 was really where I sort of finished the book. Then my agent and I worked on it. She had some people read it. I definitely made like a few changes here and there. 2016, it was sold to the publisher, and they didn't want to publish it till 2017. And we went through another revision. So, I mean, really, all told, it was a long process to get that book to where it ended up,
Yeah. Sounds that way. I mean, you have to have a lot of patience 9 months to birth a child, and I know that when you're working on it, how do you keep your enthusiasm up over that amount of time? Or do you also want to like birth it and then move on to the next? Or
for sure.
For sure. Or is it hard to give it up?
Both, actually. I mean, you go through stages of, I never want to see this thing again. And if this person tells me that I should change the sentence that you've been hanging on to desperately for the entire life of the book, and you just suddenly go, fine, you win, I'll change it. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, you do go through moments like that. But also because you've spent so much time on it, you do hang on to little things that you really feel are important. But also there was a lot with the book that I didn't understand going in. Obviously it makes sense because it's very obvious of how many anachronistic mistakes you can make. I mean, like, you couldn't even talk about the color of the sky being steel gray because steel wasn't invented yet. I mean, at one point I had Mrs. Pinkney's dress being compared to Dusty Rose, blah, blah. Roses they came from China and they hadn't even made it to the Royal Botanical Garden in London yet. And these are people in the colonies. I mean, they'd definitely never seen a rose. So, there's just little interesting things like that if you let yourself think about it, will stop you ever writing a word. So you have to just get the story out and know that you can go back and make these changes, but be willing to hold on enough to the passion that you'll go back and fix these things, but not too much that you can't move forward.
Right. That's fascinating. I never heard it, put exactly like that, but that is fascinating. So tell us more about her. So she, I don't want you to give the end. Obviously, I don't want you to give the, key points of the book because it's too good. People have to read it. But do you have a copy of it with you right there that you can hold up by any chance?
I do. One moment.
Good.
Oops, just dropped my bookmarks. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, so.
There we go. Okay. It's a nice cover.
It's a beautiful cover. They did a beautiful job.
Yeah, it's a beautiful cover. So what happened? So she does this and so is it a plant, indigo? Because I don't know.
Yeah. So it's a plant. So they basically her father sent her seeds, indigo seeds. The French were making indigo, but they were using woad, which is a different kind of plant, and you have to plant twice as much to make the same amount of indigo. And woad didn't really work and didn't take in the colonies. And there was a lot of French, especially in the Charleston area, because the French Huguenots had come to Charleston after the persecution in France. And so they had tried woad, it didn't work. And in fact, there is a gentleman in the book, Mr. DeVoe, who she was friends with, who was sort of a kind of mentor, but who had told her, look, woad is the only thing I've really had experience with. But she did still learn a lot from him on the botany side. But she got the seeds from her father, and really over the course of 4 years, they sort of adapted. But they still took a lot of care. They didn't just grow naturally in the South. It did die out, actually, just a sidebar, it died out after the revolution. And up until recently, people have been convinced that it didn't grow at all anymore in America. And then by accident, somebody was out on Ossabaw Island, which is a barrier island off the coast of Georgia, and noticed this plant growing around the sort of caretaker's cottage, and said, oh, I think that's indigo. And the groundsmen were like, no, indigo doesn't grow here anymore. And they were like, no, I think that's indigo. And so they sent it off to be tested. And sure enough, it was indigo. And it's now heritage indigo because it has adapted to its environment and it can grow in the South. So it's been here long enough that it's adapted. But she, the process of making indigo was so complicated that I had to stop writing the book at one point. And there's only so many YouTube tutorials and in sort of indigo documentaries you can watch until you just like, I still don't get it. Because when you understand the process, you just have to see it for yourself, like to be able to understand the process. And even then I don't really, but I stopped and I said, okay, I can't go on. And I reached out to somebody I'd met in Charleston who knew a woman who worked with naturally grown indigo. And I called her and I was like, look, I'm writing this book. I'm so sorry to send you this sort of mad flap help panic email. But this is the situation. I don't understand. And I need to be able to see it to write about it. And she called me. Actually, I had my number on the email. And I'm a texter. I'm of that generation. I text, I don't call. And she called me right away. And I was like, hello. And she said, I am doing an indigo workshop this weekend. It's the last one I'm doing for the rest of the year until the next crop grows next summer. And so if you're willing to wait a year to finish your book, that's fine. But if you want to know, you need to get in the car. And it was Thursday. You need to get in the car and come down to Ossabaw Island. And that's how I found out the story, by the way, of the indigo on Ossabaw. And I did. And I found myself, at 5 o'clock in the morning on a misty boat. You can only get there by boat. Not a misty boat, but on a boat on a misty morning. And I learned about indigo. And to understand it, when you see the process done, I mean, we stripped the leaves and we put them in water and we gently heated up the water, and it took forever, but we had a Bunsen burner, like a sort of propane tank going. And back in Eliza's day, they just relied on sunlight. And we went through this whole process, you know, following this, and we churned it up. And you just sit there staring at this thing, and it's basically just water with wet leaves. I mean, that's for hours. And then all of a sudden, you suddenly start seeing these little tendrils. It's like dropping ink in a bottle, you know, in a bucket of water. You suddenly start seeing the blue bleed into the water, and you're like, oh, it's happening, yay. Well, no, it's not done yet, because the indigo molecule is not soluble, and therefore it cannot adhere to fiber. So at that point, they've got to do something else to the mix and oxygenate it. And then once they're done with that and mix it up, it doesn't even look like blue. It looks like green sludge. And you dip something in. We all had to take something white, and you dip it in and you pull it out, and it comes out lime green. It doesn't come out blue. It comes out lime green, like chartreuse. And it's only when you wave it in the air and the oxygen in the air interacts with it that it suddenly starts to turn blue in front of your eyes. And you think, oh, how on earth did they figure this out? The ancients figured this out. And then Eliza, you know, going on, basically, I mean, you know, she had the enslaved people who worked on the plantation, you know, she knew that they knew how to work with indigo, but there's so many different ways of making it. They ended up hiring an indigo maker from Montserrat who deliberately messed up the batch that they had, which if you read the book, you'll know, and that's a real part of the true history that happened. And so it just was the most complicated process. And you think, gosh, well, she certainly had staying power. But also it's just actually, I mean, it's remarkable that it ended up being successful.
Well, how did she know, though, that this was, I mean, there's so many things she could have, you know, grown or done, or what, why this?
Right. Well, she did. They grew a lot of things. They grew rice. She was experimenting with fruit trees. She planted live oaks, even knowing that it would be 50 years before they could be used for anything, shipbuilding and such. But this was going to be, if it worked, was going to be the most lucrative thing of all. But it was a huge undertaking and a gamble to do it. But she was convinced it could work.
And hence we got dungarees.
For sure. I mean, well, look, the French were already making indigo, and like, for anybody who knows their indigo history, denim is from Nîmes, from Nîmes in France. That's the origination of that word. So we would have had dungarees, I think, but maybe we wouldn't have had I don't know, maybe it wouldn't have taken off as much as it did. It certainly was, the money, the wealth that it built in the area was certainly instrumental in changing the course of history. And I don't say that, you know, as a sort of flippant side remark. It for sure did.
Fascinating. So she is responsible for denim, basically, here.
Here, maybe. Here. Yes. I mean, a lot of it was exported.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And wasn't she awarded? Did I read something that she was awarded some kind of an award, or
posthumously? I mean, you know, 200 years or so after her death, she was inducted into the South Carolina Women's Business Hall of Fame, and then the South Carolina, and then the Business Hall of Fame. But yeah, it took several hundred years after she died for anybody to recognize that contribution.
And that happens even with a famous painter, you know.
Yeah,
their paintings aren't popular till they're dead. But right. It just goes to show you that not too many things are impossible, or some things are not impossible. Where there's a will, there's a way.
Where there's a will, there's a way. And I will say one more thing, though. She really could not have done it without the enslaved people on her plantation. And that's a really tricky part of the history to deal with, because, you know, the sort of idea of the kindly slave owner is a contradiction in terms. And that was sort of a hard thing to get over for me in writing the book, that I was writing about somebody who owned other human beings, but she did not own them, which was the interesting thing that I discovered in the course of writing the book, is she did not have any agency. She did end up freeing sort of her, there was an enslaved man who worked on her plantation quash, who she didn't end up freeing, and he went on, she educated him actually. So against the laws of the day, she was educating her enslaved people to read and write, which was definitely, it was against the law. And she helped educate Quash, who ended up becoming an architect. And after she freed him, he actually built the home on East Bay Street in Charleston that her and Charles Pinckney, who she eventually married, lived in. But it's been a really tricky part of the history to deal with, because, you know, I don't believe that her accomplishments should be thrown out because of the time that she was in. Some people do, and that's okay.
Wait. Explain that to me.
Okay.
What do you mean that some people want to throw out her accomplishments?
I think people believe that she had agency, that she was in a position to abolish slavery, to free all her slaves. She wasn't. She was not the owner of her slaves. Her father wasn't. Her father wasn't around. I mean, and yes, she was conducting business in his stead, but it wasn't, she was ambitious and those sort of things, but she wasn't in a position to change the societal structure.
We don't know.
She didn't
know to.
She didn't know to, and she was dealing with her own stuff. And if, you know, for people who've read the book, you'll understand that Ben, even though I've mentioned he's not real, was such an important part of the book, because he was the mirror. He was the embodiment of her struggle. When she has a conversation with him and they have this sort of argument, really, and she says to him, you don't understand, like, you can be free. If somebody freed you, he wasn't hers to free. If somebody freed you, you could go and own land. You're a man. I, as a woman, can never own land. And by the way, people easily forget their women's history and take it all for granted. But no, women couldn't own land until, I mean, roughly 100 years ago in some places, and sometimes even less. In Texas, you couldn't even have your own bank account until the 60s. So, you know, everything belonged to your husband. And how easily we forget the struggle that we've had. But she comes through, in essence, this conversation that she has with Ben is so important for people who read the book to understand. And a lot of people who've read the book just paint right over it, and they don't understand that she does not have agency. She can never own land. She is always going to be owned by a husband or a father, and all she wants is her independence, and she is never going to get it, ever. And that's her big frustration. And, you know, she falls in love with Charles, and which is after the scope of the book. It's just history. I'm not spoiling anything for you, but she fell madly in love with Charles, and they had a really wonderful marriage. And the thing that you'll see in the book, which is definitely true, is how much he encouraged her to pursue those ambitions and to give her the freedom to be who she was.
Do you think she would have married him, the kind of person she was? It sounds to me like she would do what she could do, and she did what she could do the best that she could do it, and whatever she couldn't do, she might not have done. But do you think she would have married him if he wasn't the kind of man that he was?
Personally, no. Now, at the time that Mrs. Pinckney passed away, and then Mrs. Pinckney passed away in January of 1744, because Charles was married. And then Eliza and Charles married in May, in 4 short months. You know, which a lot of people raised their eyebrows at, but it was pretty common at the time. But I think she would have gone back with her family to Antigua. They were all packing up to leave, to go back. And she would have gone back. if it hadn't been for Charles. I don't think she would have stayed in a marriage with somebody that she didn't respect, who wasn't going to allow her to be who she was. She would have rather have gone home and just remained with her mother, who
right. So she had some of her so she had her priorities, but then again, she only knew what she knew, and that's all and she could do what she could do, and what she couldn't do, she just didn't even give any energy to it.
Yeah, I think she knew what she could control and what she couldn't. And she was very deliberate about where she spent her energy.
So what's next? I mean, are you working on the next? Is that a secret, or what's next for you?
Well, right now I'm writing, and I went through a stage of very horrible burnout, and I also had some family issues. Right at the end of 2019 towards 2020, I was already suffering from a lot of some creative burnout. And then we had a lot of issues, like a family member got very ill. And I am not one of those people who can deal with, I've got number 4 empathy, and I think my number 1 is adaptability, which sounds good, but I've got basement adaptability, which means I just take things as they come at me. I can't not deal with things as they arrive. And so I have a hard time keeping a boundary on those things so that I can get my creative work done and be there for someone else. So I really and truly sort of came to a crashing halt, which was where I really had to take stock of myself and all those things. My publisher of the Indigo Girl is ready and waiting for 2 additional books, historical fiction books. So that is the plan, and I have 2 that I've been researching. One of them I've kind of come up against a little bit of a brick wall, because there's one scholar who knows a lot about this person, and unless I can sort of interface with this person, I might not be able to get the information I need. And it's dealing with the education of women. Then the other one is sort of a well-known Southern story, which I won't mention. I mean, she's been written about before, but I feel like after doing the Indigo Girl and putting my own, this is my thing. There are so many important women's stories out there, and if you can get them out into the general public in a way that they're entertain. And my goal for writing Eliza's story was just so that people would know who she was. Obviously, there's creative license taken. Right? I mean, it's a historical fiction. It's not a historical textbook. But the fact is that when you're working in fiction, you have the opportunity to bring somebody into the general consciousness that wasn't there before, or had been forgotten. And so I feel like there are many stories like that if I can put my own way of bringing them into the world that might entertain and that might bring that person back to life in a way that has been forgotten for some people who've, they may have never crossed the path of this historical figure, then that's worth doing. I think we're at an interesting time. I mean, we've had our first female vice presidential nomination, and win, vice president elect, and I am so excited by that. And I also want to remind people, when we talk about women's history, that women have always done these astounding things, but they weren't being written about. And the more we can sort of try and bring these stories to light, the more it's just expected that women are able to do these things, and they don't have to have slept their way to the top to be successful. Nobody asked that of men. So the more we can start bringing these stories to light, the more it goes into the general consciousness that women are just as capable as men, I think. And that's so simplistic, and we can all say, oh, well, of course they are, but not everybody believes that. And as soon as we can bring more and more of these stories to light, so it's just part of our general fabric of history, right. It's just general knowledge, then shouldn't be so, we should still celebrate every woman's success, but we don't have to have that's, I guess, I don't know how she did that. Let's not be so surprised that women can do these
right.
things.
No, I
there's
absolutely
a fine balance.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. I now call myself a stigma squisher because of the same thing you're saying. It's very important for me to bring stories out into the public with an opportunity of somewhat commercializing them. So they become part of, as you say, that fabric.
Yeah.
So that we're not sitting here judging and staying disconnected and scared to find out more, when I don't have to like what you do, but at least let me know about it.
Exactly.
Right? I don't have to choose to be an author if I don't want to, but it's great to hear your story.
Exactly. I mean, and what we were talking about earlier with the mind, you know, being the sort of protector, it's really the unknown. Like, the mind hates the unknown. Fear lives in the unknown. Fear feeds off the unknown. And so the more we know, the less we can react in a closed way, more we can react in an open way. You know, the less fearful things are. And women take more chances if they know that it's been done before.
Absolutely. That's why we do the show called Breaking Free.
Yeah.
So that we have an opportunity to share things that people can know about and just tuck away for another day, but just know. So with that, I'm going to ask Amnon to pull up my books. Amnon, you got my books? There we go. So these are my books. I'm doing a series of books I'm writing in just one afternoon, listening into the hearts of. And this way we get to know about different individuals. Could be what they stand for. It could be their philosophy, something that we listen into it so we understand it, so we can make up our own minds and we get to know them. And so the first one was men. So I interviewed a bunch of men about their lives, how they did things, how they think about things, feel about things. So we get a good snapshot into what a man is really like, for men to be able to express themselves and for women to understand the path of a man. Then the next one was twins, and they have a lot to teach us about relationships, sibling rivalry, parenting, all kinds of stuff. They are amazing. Then millennials. You know, once you understand why a millennial may be in the basement of a parent's house, maybe you won't feel so bad about them. And then really, and then opioid addiction, which is the one, people impacted by opioid addiction, which is the one that I most recently published, and it talks. Shares stories, talks about people from both sides, those that are in recovery, those individuals that are struggling, family members, loved ones, girlfriends, boyfriends, children, and how each of them deal with it and what they do about it, so that we're not judging a family's environment for the reason that somebody may become addicted. Then the next one that I am currently beginning is in just one afternoon, listening to the hearts of Black fathers. Some wonderful stories about Black men and the roles they play with their children, and in some cases, the roles they didn't play and how they are making up for it, so that we understand Black men. So these are all available on Amazon in both ebook and print. And there's a whole bunch after that. Yeah, I love what you just said. Thank you, Amnon. I love what you just said. I am a hound when it comes to breaking those barriers and shining a light, so that this is a better place to live, and we get along better, right?
And the unknown becomes known, and therefore it's not feared.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we have to squish those fears, so that in the case of the opioid individuals and people who are addicted, I mean, if we fear them, they stay in the closet. If we don't, they come out and get help, maybe.
We hope.
Right? We hope. Oh, well, we can. Yeah. Exactly. So you think that is your passion now to stay in historical kinds of things? Because I think it's great. I mean, people understand things in a story.
Yeah, I think storytelling has always been the way that human history has traveled through time. And I think that will be the way it continues. The formats might change. The delivery will change. We might be able to stick a story chip in our head in the future. Who knows? But the storytelling is the way to go. And I do feel I feel split in two as far as the historical fiction and my regular writing goes. I want to continue the historical fiction because of that reason. Like, I feel quite passionately about that. I have done so many book clubs, especially in 2020, Zoom book clubs, and talks about Eliza. And I've been more convinced every time that that this is a good thing, and my passion for that is growing and becoming more crystallized in talking about women's history. I will never probably stop writing romance, because goodness knows, don't we all need a happily ever after?
Yes.
I mean,
yes,
and there's a reason why it's the largest selling genre ever, because everybody wants a happily ever after, and they want a happy place to disappear to. That's the other thing about stories. Like, they've always been an escape, whether it's an escape of unknowing to knowing, or an escape of your life to somebody else's fictional life, or an escape visiting somebody else's life in the form of a memoir or a biography. It's always been just such a beautiful way to expand our minds, but also to, I really feel like the inherent value of romance is so often dismissed, and sort of poo-pooed and ridiculed a little bit. But every great story has love at the backbone. I mean, Lord of the Rings, for goodness sake. I mean, you can go through every great story. And in fact, we just watched, on family movie night, we just watched Die Hard, which was hilarious because we were trying to find the mix between an action movie that would keep the 16-year-old entertained, and a Christmas movie. And it was probably far too many F words for the 12-year-old. But we decided to go for it anyway. And, at the end, it's all about John McClane saving his wife, who he still loves, even though they were supposed to maybe be getting a divorce. And at the end, they don't. I mean, people forget that. It's a love story. It's not a terrorist movie. It's a love story. So, yeah, I mean, I just feel like I will never stop writing romance, just for that very reason.
Well, when during the all this election stuff, and we needed a break from watching the news, we'd watch Hallmark. It was a great release to watch. I could tell you how all the stories were going to end. Yeah. Right. But it's
how they get there,
and how
that's
they get
exciting.
Yeah, exactly. But and we're talking about women. Women are very, very are powerful. And I like the idea of women today are more and more powerful. And I like the idea of bringing the kinds of women, I believe, that you're bringing back from history to kind of closing the gap. Amongst other things that I do, I'm the founder of a networking organization for women. And several of us have gotten together to write a book together. And the book is about breaking rules.
Awesome.
And each of the women took a chapter and are writing about their process of how they became who they are and the rules that they had to break. Because, look, if we're not breaking some rules, then we ain't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because I like to say, whose rule are you living anyway?
Right.
Whose fear are you fearing anyway? It ain't always yours, right?
Right.
So.
Right. It's true. I mean, human progression is based on breaking rules across time. I mean, otherwise we would all still be following the rule of sending the men out to hunt while we tended fire and animals.
Yeah, and I want to really tell you, Natasha, how much I appreciate your authenticity and, for your process, because, the process of writing, not everybody out there obviously knows, because not everybody's a writer, but it's not easy. I mean, it is not. I did not start off this career of mine as a writer. I'm a talker. I make up my own words. I'm blah 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 blah. But I am finding my writing voice, and let me tell you what, it's exciting to find those metaphors or the ways of expressing yourself that I never knew I could do before. And with you and talking about the historical thing, and that wasn't, your original path, and you didn't think, I love how your career as an author has shifted and taken a road so that people who are out there will know that it is possible.
It is possible. It is possible. We only have to try, but we have to try without expectation for ourselves. Because when you try with an expectation for yourself, you've basically said there's only one acceptable outcome and anything else means a failure. And that's not the truth. But trying without an expected outcome is the only way to move forward. And but I agree with you. Writing is difficult. The struggle is, I struggle every day with getting words on the page every day. And obviously, people will be like, well, now that you've done so many, it must be easy. No, it gets harder, because you're just how every mother who's had more than one child forgets the pain of childbirth. You look at your books that you've already written and you've forgotten the struggle and pain you went through to get that to the finished product. And so you're expecting the next one you sit down to write to be as good right out the gate as that one that's sitting on the shelf. And you expect you're writing with everybody's voices in your head, every reader, every reviewer, every critiquer, your publisher, your agent. Maybe your family is depending on you to publish this book to put food on the table. Like the voices get louder and don't stop. So it will always be a struggle. But that doesn't mean it's a struggle not worth doing.
When I did the men's book, I pulled my hair out because it was the first one and I just had no concept of what to do. I literally pulled my hair out. When I did the second one with the twins, made it too long because I could not stop with all the twins. By the time I got to the millennials, I was really like, that was third. I was flowing a little bit better. I had my groove. And a friend of mine who is a New York Times bestselling author, I heard her speak in public. Diane Chamberlain, do you know who she is?
I have not come across her.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she got up and she was talking about her writing process and blah, blah, blah. And she was saying how when it came to her third book, and I hadn't said this to anybody because I didn't know I could say this to anybody because maybe I was the only one experiencing it. So what am I going to tell? But I heard her say it. I heard her say that the third book, and she's written 30, the third book was her bridge, was like, was it for her? And I heard that and I'm like, oh, that's so true. Oh, that's me too, and you want to hear these and you want to know. So for all of you out there that are, writers, write,
Yes.
author, write. Don't worry about anybody else. Don't worry about anything. Just start writing. Write. Right?
Yeah, you've got to keep your mind shut off. You have to feel the fear. In fact, a great book, if anybody is struggling with this, is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert.
Oh my God.
That's been one of the most pivotal books for me. And in fact, before it even came out, I was listening to her Magic Lessons podcast where she interviewed creative people. It was about 8 episodes long, I think, maybe 16 because they were kind of broken into 2 parts each one. But I was just floored by that because what I realized is she put voice to the thing that we all struggle with, is not banishing fear, but accepting the role that fear plays in everything that we do. And it's like, but he doesn't have to drive the car. He can be there. He can sit in the back seat. He can sit in the passenger seat. He can ride on the roof, but he can't drive the car.
And
you get to drive the car.
Absolutely. And that book was pivotal to me too, because when she started talking, and I highly suggest it to everybody, when she talks about ideas having an entity. And when she started with that, my book idea, I might have given it up in just one afternoon listening to the hearts of, because I could write that about I could interview anybody about anything. And when I read that about ideas, it was like, oh no, this is my book. This is my idea.
You need to act on it before it goes to find somebody else.
Absolutely, before it starts floating around and somebody else picks it up, because I wanted it for myself. Yeah. So Oh, unfortunately, we are out of time. But
This has been amazing.
Oh, you are such a great guest. I'm so happy you came. Thank you. Where can everybody find your book, though? Just tell them.
All my books are on Amazon, Kobo, Google, Barnes & Noble, wherever you can find digital books sold, and bookstores. And my website is natashaboyd.com. So
would you just remember us? And next time you want to come on a show and talk about anything, will you let me know?
Oh, of course. It would be a pleasure. This has been so great, Marilyn. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a wonderful holiday.
You too. You too. And happy holidays to everybody.
Thank you. And everyone out there, have a wonderful holiday week this week. We love you a lot. And we thank Amnon, and we will see you very soon. Take care. Bye.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by Telestream's Wirecast software, StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.